fishing boats in that first century during Jesus' time. They were 27 feet long, 8 feet wide, and 5 feet deep. And they could hold a crew of 5 men. The mode of fishing was by nets. They fished by netting, made from flax. You needed a fishing license, just like you would today to have a driver's license for a car. And in order to fish the Sea of Galilee, the local rulers, they controlled the fishing rights. And they would contract those rights to the fishermen. Well, 2 of those fishermen were brothers. One was Andrew and the other was Cephas. Their boat was handed down to them by their dad, whose name was John. And they would fish from the port from Bethsaida, which was a little village on the north end of the Sea of Galilee. Andrew said to his brother Peter, Cephas, one day when they were mending their fishing nets, "There's a new rabbi in town, and he has a great reputation. How would you like to come with me and meet him? I know where he's staying." So they left their work and they knocked on his door. And we find the story in John chapter 1, verse 35. Jesus answered the door and he said to them, "What are you looking for?" That phrase is only found in this chapter, and you won't find it anywhere else in the Bible. And it's a wonderful line. Jesus invited them in, and the Bible says that they stayed with him for the whole day. Can you picture that? Spending a whole day with Jesus? Well, the brothers were curious. And when Jesus asked them, "What are you looking for?" Well, they weren't sure. Whatever it was, that day, they're going to find it. And they're also going to find their Messiah. What they talked about when they stayed all day? Bible doesn't tell us. Jesus probably talked to them about their fishing business. How's your mom and dad doing? Do you like doing your job? And then the conversation probably went deeper. They saw a new and exciting way of looking at their world. No doubt Jesus explained parts of the Old Testament that they'd never heard before when they went to their synagogue to hear their rabbi talk. He renewed their hope in God. And in the course of that entire day, Jesus listened when those brothers talked. He made the 2 fishermen feel valued, and they felt understood. As hard-working laborers, tanned and rugged, probably there with worn-out garments, both longing in their hearts and full of questions, they responded to Jesus' questions, "What are you looking for?" And they talked about it for the whole day. Well, when these 2 found them that day, I wonder what they were looking for. You and I want personal treatment, don't we? Listening and understanding. What are you looking for? I want somebody to talk to me and then just not cut me off. He'll hear me and not judge me. And when I'm talking, he's listening, not interrupting me or treating me with sarcasm. Instead, he understands my heart and he offers me love and acceptance. And then when I pray to him and I pour out my heart to him, he hears me. We sing a hymn in my class. It's one you all know. What a friend we have in Jesus. There's one of those lines in that hymn that I really like. Can we find a friend so faithful, who will all our sorrows share? Jesus knows our every weakness. Take it to the Lord in prayer. He understands and listens. Well, that's what these two disciples found that day. Andrew told his brother Peter, "Come, I want you to meet this new teacher in town." They met him. They found value. They were heard. They were listened to. and they seemed to understand that he took time to spend with them. When you're talking to a stranger, or even to a little child, do they respond to you? Or do you ignore them and they ignore you? Last winter, I was shoveling my walk in front of my house. The snow had fallen that night and it was 4 or 5 inches thick, and everything was a winter wonderland at 7 o'clock that day. It wasn't quite daylight, but my street light across the street, it lit up my yard and sidewalk. And 2 or 3 blocks from my house is a wilderness. And in that wilderness, wild deer, they'll come at night and they'll scratch the snow, or if there is no snow, they'll eat the grass. And they stay, but when they come, they always leave their calling card, little piles of black jelly beans. And those little droppings, they're in the front yard and in the backyard because I don't have any fencing. Well, that morning, my yard was covered with these droppings, and they were so pronounced against the white snow. When I was shoveling the snow off my sidewalk, a young mother, walking hand in hand with her little daughter, third grader, she was coming to the end of the street to catch the bus. When they got to me, I spoke to the little girl and I said to her, "Do you see this?" I pointed to the piles of jelly beans, staring at her from that deep white snow in my yard. And I said, "Do you know what this is?" She came closer and gazed and looked at these piles of little brown balls, and she shook her head. "No, I have no idea. What are they?" I told her they were made by Rudolph. He was here last night and he made them. Well, that little girl, that 3-year-old, having come closer, she had this puzzled expression on her face, and she turned to her mother and she said, "Mummy, why didn't Santa make Rudolph clean up his mess?" Our basic needs are very few. That little girl was aware of Rudolph. She also knew that red-nosed reindeer, if he was not going to obey himself better, he wasn't going to work for Santa. Our needs are so different, no different than hers. We don't need to drive Teslas or Cadillacs like the advertisers tell us to do. Nor do we need to go to the moon. And our nation doesn't need more missiles, and we don't need more bombs. We do need warm houses in winter here in Canada, comfortable shelter, bread and milk. But there's something else that we need a lot more than that. We need lots of listening. Someone who'll take time for me, show me my messy world that I live in, and say, "Santa, help me clean up this mess." The world that can leave you in bewilderment. I find there are very few out there that really want to listen to me. And there's nothing more frustrating than going to your doctor and you've got an illness or you've got an ailment of some kind, and the doctor doesn't listen to you. You just become a case to be treated instead of a person to be listened to. Do you ever find that? Have you ever seen the movie Patch Adams? Robin Williams, he plays the young man who commits himself to a mental hospital after a long period of depression. And there's a scene where Williams, he's going to be having a conversation with a psychiatrist. But that doctor isn't listening. He doesn't hear a thing he's saying. He's too busy. He's reading his medical file. And he busies himself putting cream and sugar into his coffee. Totally preoccupied. And he never lifts his head to even look at Williams. And Williams doesn't even feel that he's been his patient. Totally ignored. Finally, Patch leaves the office, and he says to himself, I'll show him. I am somebody. And I am somebody that knows how to listen. And I'm going to fool you, doctor. Because one day I'm going to become a doctor and I'm going to be better than you are. And it's a true story. There was a Patch Adams, and he became a wonderful family doctor. Well, we all long for pastors, we long for doctors, and we long for professionals to treat us like human beings. Just give me some understanding. There's a young writer, shortly before his death. He suffered from prostate cancer. Here's what he wrote. I wouldn't demand a lot from my doctor's time. I wish he'd feel a little more deeply at my situation, though. Maybe give me 5 minutes. Maybe just his whole mind once. Bond with me for just a brief space. Look into my soul as well as my flesh to get at my illness. Don't just order blood tests and don't just order bone scans for my body. Doctor, listen. Instead, try scanning me. Try groping for my spirit as well as my prostate. Without you looking there, all I am to you is my illness. Over the years, I've learned to listen better. Churches place a heavy burden on their pastors, often to the place that they can't be listened to anymore. He has to be an expert businessman. Sometimes he has to be a politician, an accountant, a community director, just a good fellow, well meant. Sometimes he has to be a judge, even a lawyer. He's got to be a settler of local quarrels. And when that's over, I find you're given very little time to listen. Jesus demonstrated the power of love by listening and understanding to those two fishermen that came and visited him that day. Jesus said, love one another as I have loved you. And the one sign by which the world is going to know that you're my disciple is how you love one another. Well, in this lesson, let me tell you where to begin. You're going to begin with yourself. You listen to be comfortable with your own silence, your own stillness. And if you can't do that, you'll never be able to listen to anybody else. And if you follow the life of Jesus, did you know that he would go all off by himself into the night just to talk to his Father in heaven? During the day, he spoke to throngs of people. He was always busy, always engaging, teaching his apostles. And then he'd go off all by himself alone to pray in silence. Our world is very noisy. It bugs my wife when she hears all those noises. And she complains to me all the time. It's hard to find silence anymore. The rush of traffic, the scream of the sirens. It's not just the noise of the city. We have to face the radio, the TV, the news, talk shows, interviews, screaming music. No one is silent enough to allow the other person time to make any remark. Talk shows, well, that's all they are. No one really hears what the other is saying, and nobody even really cares. Church services are now uncomfortable. Worship is now packed with noise. There's no silence anymore. Silence has almost become a sin. The need for solitude has almost become a sickness. What happened to that expression, be still and know that I am God? Christ called us to be listeners, to be comfortable with our own silence. I saw something really cute yesterday. One of the members in my class, her husband is in the hospital. He's got double pneumonia. And I took her over there to visit him. And as I was standing by the bed, she did something very beautiful. She got out her purse and she handed me the daily bread, which is a little notebook that I give to all my class for them to have daily readings. I read what was on that day in the book for him, and I read the devotional. After I was done, I watched that lady reach over and take her husband's hand, and he's over 90 years of age, and look right into his eye and said, "Honey, would you let me talk to Jesus for you?" And she closed her eyes and she prayed. And a most beautiful prayer. Jesus, you've been with us all these years, and now I'm on the verge of saying goodbye. Thank you for helping me get to the finish line with you. What the church used to teach us, and we didn't listen very well, we're now beginning to learn as a church. We're finding some good news coming out of the business world. They're now teaching the church a very important lesson. And it's one of the latest and most publicized business management skills I think you could ever find. It's called MBWA, Management by Walking Around. It's very simple. Here's the formula for managing people. Its basic tenet is this: unless people are listened to, they won't feel valued. If you aren't valued, the workplace is going to suffer. And people aren't going to be cogs in the production machine unless they are heard. Frank Stronach, he was the founder and the CEO of the Magna Corporation, and they make auto parts. And they got 300 companies all over the world. Well, to stay in touch with his workplace, Stronach, he used to leave his office and he'd disguise himself as a workman, put on a set of overalls, and he'd go out into the plant. And there on the assembly line, he would talk to his men. And it was there he learned the idea of how to become a good manager. Walt Disney did the same thing. When he founded Disneyland back in Los Angeles, do you know what he did? Remember now, that's become a worldwide success story. And they've got not just one of their Disneylands there, they've got them all over the world. Disney had an apartment built for himself above the train station there on the main gate. And there he would spend many, many days with his wife, living, watching, learning. He would dress as a tourist, and he'd stand in line at the rides outside, and he'd converse in that line with all the people coming for the ride. How do you like Disneyland? What changes would you make if you heard criticisms? Do you think you'd like to come back? Walt Disney based his operation on how well he listened to those customers. He listened when they didn't even know who he was. In our world, who has time to listen anymore? There are things to do. We've all got meetings to attend, projects to complete. Listening is an art, but we've lost it. Here's our greatest problem. There's a cost to not listening. When you don't listen, little hurts become big hurts. And when little things are not addressed, big things happen. People are overlooked. People become crisis product, and people in their crisis, they become major disturbances. Why are there riots in the street? Why are cities being burned? Why are the police forces doubling in size? Well, what are you looking for? Jesus said to these two fishermen, Andrew and Peter. All they wanted was someone to listen to them, feel valued, understood. And Jesus does all those things. Martin Luther, he invited his people to become little Christ. What he meant was, listen to one another. Learn to silence yourself to listen to others. Let me conclude with something that I found in the Harvard Business Review. That's a publication that's produced by the university as a leading resource for many disciplines. It said in this article, a good listener is like a trampoline. It's somebody that you can bounce ideas off like a springing bouncy cushion, and you amplify your energies and you clarify your thinking. They make you feel better, not by absorbing, but by actively supporting. By so doing, you gain energy, you get height, just like somebody jumping on a trampoline. And the height that you jump depends on your listening skills. Here are your levels of listening skills that you're going to aim for. There's going to give me 6. Here's the first one. Level 1. Create a good environment where emotions and complex issues can percolate and be a source for change. Work on your setting. Here's the second level. The listener clears the way so that distractions don't interfere. Turn off your phone. Turn off your pager. Turn off your computer. Focus on the other person and give them eye contact. Here's the third level. Listen to what he's saying. Capture his ideas. Ask questions and repeat his words to confirm that you understood what he said. Here's the fourth level. Keep an eye on his facial gestures, his body language. 80% of what we communicate comes from those signals. Listen with your eyes as well as your ears. Here's the fifth level. When they talk, don't be judgmental. And don't jump your ideas and dump them on him to the point that he stops talking. A good listener empathizes and validates those feelings by being supportive. Finally, here's the last one. Don't hijack the conversation. You will only be appreciated to the level that the listener is heard. Never criticize him or belittle him. Well, each of these levels, they build on the other. It's better to be stopping short than to go too far. A good listener acts like a sponge. He learns to absorb. And the highest and best form of listening comes from you jumping on the same trampoline, playing along. It gives energy, it gives acceleration, it gives height, and it gives amplification. And these are the hallmarks of great listeners. Jesus gave a whole day to 2 burly fishermen. At the end of that day, Jesus said to Cephas, Cephas, I'm not going to call you that anymore. I'm going to give you a new nickname. I'm going to call you Peter. The word Peter in the Hebrew means rock. You're going to be my new foundation. I'm going to form a thing called the church, and I'm going to have you as one of its cogs. You're going to leave your fishing business, and I want the 2 of you to now become fishers of men. You knew how to use your nets to catch fish. Now you're going to use your personalities to catch people. And they did that. And they both became disciples. Peter wrote a book. It's in your Bible. 1 Peter, 2 Peter. That day, those 2 men, even though they were with him all day, they heard enough to become fishers of men. Maybe you can too. Read that portion. 1st chapter of John, where they came to his door and said, we're fishermen. Jesus said, what can I do for you? See what he can do for you. I'll see you next week when you come back.